As I mentioned earlier, abuse is a topic discussed more today than in previous years. But still, until the hurting stops, the dialogue should continue until everyone feels empowered to leave an abusive relationship and seek the help they need. Here to offer insight into abusive relationships, as well as how to receive support, is Susan Cacciola, who's a certified legal nurse consultant. Welcome, Susan.
Hello, it's nice to be here.
Thank you. You know, it's a hard topic to tackle. It's a hard topic to understand. It's a hard topic to deal with, whether you are in a relationship or a situation where you're being abused, or when you're seeing someone and you believe that they are being abused. So I think the biggest thing that I want to identify first is, how do we define or identify abuse?
Well, abuse can best be defined as treating someone in a harmful way, an injurious way, or in a offensive way. Mm-hmm. And it can be physical, it can be emotional, verbal, sexual, neglectful, or any of the above.
That's a broad spectrum.
Yes, it is.
And I know a lot of abuse can happen at home, and that's our domestic abuse problem.
Yes, that's correct.
Can you talk to me a little bit about domestic abuse?
Domestic abuse, like you said, is within the home situation, and it can be either a child and a parent, or it can be partners, or it can also be an elderly person and their caretaker, which might be either someone they've hired or a relative.
That's the most important thing, I think, to remember, is so many times when I think of domestic abuse, I might think of a woman, a small woman, or I might think of children. But it doesn't matter what age, it doesn't matter what gender, and from what I understand, it doesn't matter in terms of economic, in terms of education. Abuse can happen anywhere, in any relationship, in any situation, and
yes,
domestic abuse is a serious problem today.
Yes, it is. It can also happen in two-parent families and single-parent families, in gay and straight relationships as well.
My goodness. So what can we do in terms of identifying why does abuse happen? Are there warning signs?
Well, first we need to realize that domestic abuse or domestic violence is not always violent, but it is always about power and control. And that's because the abuser is someone who is always manipulative and controlling. And he also, or he or she also has an abnormal behavior pattern and sense of controlling a relationship to its fullest extent.
Can you give me an example of a situation that might qualify as domestic violence but not necessarily be physically violent?
Emotional abuse. There are no scars, there are no physical injuries to witness, but there is tremendous emotional impact and psychological impact that is long-lasting, much more long-lasting than a physical injury might be.
So in terms of controlling behaviors, belittling behaviors, things along those nature. Threatening natures, using fear as a weapon.
Yes.
So it doesn't necessarily have to be physical. Why does it happen?
There's a lot of different reasons why it can happen, and it can be either one or a combination of different things. For instance, an abused person might grow up and then become an abuser himself because he grew up in a situation where he felt the behavior was normal. And so he just carries that on into other relationships, whether it's a partner relationship, whether it's a work relationship, or sometimes even professional relationships. Another reason might be the adults in the situation really don't understand the growth and developmental phases of children, and so they place unrealistic expectation on children and expect them to do things and act in certain ways that they're not yet capable of doing.
So what might be some of the effects of abuse?
Well, of course, there's always the physical injuries and the ruptured organs, but there's also changes in memory that occur from repeated brain trauma. And then there's also long-lasting effects where you can have post-traumatic stress syndrome, where your memory triggers events from the past and you get this reaction to it. You can also...
So many things. I mean, there's so much wrapped up into this. You know, the descriptions that you're giving me sounds like someone who's gone through a car accident. Sounds like someone who's gone through an incredibly traumatic event or accident, a physical accident. And that's really what we're talking about here. And I think it's so hard sometimes for people to understand, well, if these can be the side effects, and not just the physical ones that you're talking about, but the mental ones as well, if all of those can be the side effects, and this is what's happening at home, and you're in the situation, why don't they get help? Why don't they leave?
There also are various reasons for that. Okay, you can see with a child, they don't know any other way of life. And to them, this is normal. And you also have to remember that these people that they live with, the abuser, are often people that they love. They're either married to them, or it's an intimate relationship, or it's a parent.
Someone who supports them. Sometimes that can be financially, or sometimes that can be emotionally. It doesn't have to be 100% sour in terms of the relationship, and typically it's not. Isn't that what's so difficult?
Correct. That's what makes it difficult, is that this goes in cycles. So you would have periods where actually the abuser is very nice and loving and caring, and then the tensions grow and the abuse begins, and then you go back again into a full cycle of abuse and back into, again, what they call the honeymoon phase. So it's very difficult for someone who loves somebody to try to just see that person always in a negative way, because there are good periods involved as well.
I've heard the phrase, you know, when it's good, it's great, but when it's bad, it's a nightmare.
Yes.
And that idea of those cycles and how it can work that way, but that's so emotionally draining for someone who's being abused. Yes. As well. And it's not just the person who's being abused who needs help, although that's certainly the priority because of the damage that can be done. But in the long run, the abuser also needs help, because there's obviously something they're not able.
Involved.
Of course, the children too, whether they're a direct result physically or they're suffering the side effects of being in the household.
An interesting fact to note is that men who abuse and batter their wives also abuse and batter their children. So you can almost guarantee that there is not just one person being abused in a family situation.
If someone's watching this right now and they're wondering if they know someone who's being abused, that there's been that thought in the back of their minds, or perhaps they're sitting in their family room right now and they're saying, would I call this abuse? What's going on with me? What's happening to me? How can we identify abuse?
Well, there are different signs of abuse, and it could be either one or several of the factors that I'm going to list. Typically, an abuser is somebody who's very controlling. So they would keep track of almost your every move and want to know what you did in detail during the day. They might keep very tight control on your finances and ask you to account for things that you've spent. They may threaten to kidnap your children or to report you to authorities for behaviors that you haven't done. They may become abusive, excessively abusive, when they drink alcohol or use drugs.
And that's interesting when you said, you know, when someone's constantly calling you, constantly saying, well, where are you going to be? Where are you? Threatening you, telling you need to come home now. Those are all signs. And if you see your friends in those similar situations, then should we say something?
We should, but very often, this is kept very secretive because there's a lot of guilt, embarrassment, and shame involved, especially in certain situations. Sometimes people are very public figures in the community or they're professionals. And so it would be very difficult for that type of family to come out. Just think how difficult it is for you or me to try to decide to lose 5 pounds, and what willpower and motivation we have to make an effort into doing to accomplish that. Well, imagine being a public figure already, and you're hiding this.
That's a really interesting comparison. The idea, it's true, we focus on that and how much time and effort and how difficult it is. Now imagine picking up your entire life and leaving the situation in which you're in. But what's crucial, if you are being abused, what's important to do?
Well, since abuse is not a one-time occurrence, it's usually repeated. And another interesting fact is that women who are abused are repeatedly abused by the same person. So you do have time to first identify that you're being abused, and then to be able to get out of the situation and make a plan of how to get out. Because once you leave, you may not be able to return.
So what should you bring with you?
Well, you need to be able to not only support yourself financially, but you have to be able to function just as if your spouse or abuser or whoever's doing the abuse died or divorced you and you just moved on in life. So you're going to need personal papers and identification, such as passports, your school and employment records, your medical records. You need all that kind of information so that you can continue. You're going to also need funds. You're going to need your bank accounts and access to money, maybe cash, credit cards. And you may have to have a credit card just in your name so that it's not canceled by the abusive partner. Mm-hmm. You're going to need keys. You're going to need keys to your car. Mm-hmm. You might need keys to your house. Abuse.
So it's important to be able to plan it out.
Yes, but
it's important to plan it out, to prepare for it, but there are resources available.
I want to backstep a little. It's important to plan it out, but in a situation where you feel that your life or the life of your children is in immediate danger, then getting the paperwork together is not that important.
No,
so that's important to impress on people, that you have to gauge where you are in the abusive relationship and how dangerous it is.
Yeah, get out, and I've found many times where people are embarrassed to tell those who could help them, who could support them, such as family members or friends or community members or members of their church. And it's an embarrassment, and don't prefer embarrassment, avoiding embarrassment over not getting help, and be able to go out there and save your children, save yourself from that kind of abuse, because there are resources out there.
Yes, there are. There are plenty of resources. I just lost my train of thought.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. I know we've got the information. You can look in the phone book, and I also know we're going to be putting it up on our screen. And there's the National Domestic Violence Abuse Hotline, which would be 1-800-799-SAFE. And if you're hearing impaired, there's also a number that you can use to contact that, so that you can find resources in your community.
Yes, you can.
And online, of course, where there are websites and so on and so forth. So, Susan, thank you so much. It's such an important topic, and we hear about it, but I think it's important to be able to think about it, to consider it, and to take action about it.
Definitely take action.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you.